Alright, today we're tying up a Flugenzombie similar to this guy. This is kind of a white olive with a purple on the head. I like purple on all flies, but it adds a good accent. So it's an articulated fly. It's not super complicated, a little bit time consuming, but really good fishy fly. So to start, the back hook on this size is a size 6. This is a 4X long straight eye streamer hook from Daiichi, the 1750. I'm using black 140 UTC. Go ahead and dress the hook. All the way back to the bend. Got a marabou tail. I'm going to again do brown over yellow on this one, so yellow will be my bottom color. I want the tail to be at least a hook shank in length. You can err on the longer side. So I like to get a few wraps to bind it down. And I'll pick this up, go forward, catch this front part. Then snip the rest of that off. Trap all this down. Tying it all the way to the eye of the hook just helps so you have a nice even body and you don't have a big bump right here because you tied it in and then cut it off, and then this is all bare. So tying it all the way to the front helps maintain that taper on the body. So a piece of marabou for the top of the tail, equal length to your bottom color. And then same method. Wrap this guy forward like this. The stem's kind of thick on this piece. I'm going to cut it back there. And that's our tail. I'm not adding any flash in the tail. There's going to be plenty of flash in the body. Got a nice bushy tail that's going to kick good for you there. So this fly uses that complex twist body, which I don't know that I've done in a video. It's not super complicated. The only trick is you do need a piece of specialized equipment, being this loon, well, any brand, but this dubbing spinner that has the alligator clips on it. So the complex twist is you take a piece of polar chenille, so it's a piece of rope with a bunch of flash coming off of it, and then you take the same two colors you did for your tail, one each of each of those colors of schlappen, and try and match up the fibers on the two feathers so that they're about even, and you're going to tie those two feathers and the polar chenille in all in the same spot. So I'm doing one at a time, but start back here with this polar chenille. Do one of my colors of schlappen, and you're tying this in at the tip and then wrapping forward. So tying these in at the tip section. So to determine where you want to tie it in, you just want to get the length that you want of these barbs. So wherever you want it to be, the shortest minimum you want, tie it in there, and then the rest of them will be that long and longer. Tie that in, cut the extra, and then similarly try and match up your length of your barbs on both of these pieces of schlappen. So you might tie them in, you know, that brown piece I tied in pretty close to the tip. This yellow piece I'm tying in more in the middle, but I'm just trying to make those two, the barbs on each of them match as relatively close as possible. So tie that in, snip there, and bring your thread out of the way. And then you're going to grab all three of those things you just tied in. Try and keep these barbs out. We're going to brush it out with a piece of Velcro later. Take your string, so you're lining the stems of the feathers and the strand in the middle of the polar chenille all in a straight line. And you clip them all together and then spin it like you would spin a dubbing loop with that alligator clip. So it blends the colors together from those two pieces of schlappen and mixes that flash in. So I'm taking a piece of Velcro here, get anything that would have got trapped in that twist loose. You can brush it out again. We're going to palmer this forward. One little brush out here helps keep everything separated. And you're going to kind of palmer forward, pulling this stuff back as you go so you don't trap too much stuff down. So I'm pulling back, turning over. And touching wraps, I mean, you don't want to, well, you don't have a super long loop here, so it's not open spiral wraps, but almost touching wraps. Just working it forward. The goal is to get all the way to the front of the, all the way to the front behind the eye with this. If you don't make it all the way there, you can add a little, another piece of schlappen on the front just to give it a more finished look. But see, I'm kind of running out of space here. I might add more space between my wraps so that I can make this piece get a little bit get more bang for my buck, make it cover more shank. It's pretty dense, plenty dense here. Still a little tight. So doing a little bit more of an open spiral wrap there to get all this to make it to the front. Alright, it's pretty much there, so I'll go ahead and tie that off. Looks kind of messy right now, but once we get it all trimmed up and brushed out, it's going to look a lot better. Alright, it's tight there. And then you can trim all three of those pieces out together. Some good scissors help. Kind of get through there, push all this back. And then wrap over it a little bit, about more than an eye length back. We're going to put some legs in, so we need a little tie-in spot, and brush all this out. The schlappen really lays back once you get it brushed good. It's unlike saddle hackle that has some stiffness. It's pretty soft, so it'll kind of lay back for you like you want after some brushing. So there's our back body. And I said I was going to tie in legs, but I'm just going to do legs in the front. So we're done with this part. I'm going to go ahead and whip finish that. dab of super glue on there. Okay, so that's the back half. The first half's gonna look a lot like that till we get to the head. So take that hook out the vise, and then the front hook is a size 2 stinger hook. This is a mustad, which is about the exact same shape as a B10S. Looks like a slightly different, probably cheaper metal, but this is the Mustad Alpha Point Aphex streamer, size 2. Pretty good hook. I end up losing some of these in the trees and everything, so I don't get too bent on using the absolute best of everything. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start our thread. We're going to do some dumbbell eyes, so I'm just going to lay down a little bit of a thread base to give those eyes something to hold on to. Then these are medium or large dumbbell eyes. The amount of material on this, especially with the top, the laser dub, or the front, the laser dub head, you need a good amount of weight to sink all that stuff. It's kind of buoyant. So put these in with some figure 8 thread wraps. Just to get them positioned good. Around tight. So got the eyes in, and you want to do them about an eyeball length back. So if this whole thing's an eyeball length, one of those back away from the eye of the hook to leave room to build up the head later on. Then take our thread back. We're going to go all the way back a little bit into the bend, so we're going to do our articulation here, and the farther back you get it from the point of the hook, the less likely it is going to be to foul. So I like to bring my thread all the way back to the barb of the hook, and then I'll bring it forward a little bit more, and leave it right in the middle. But now I kind of have a marker where that thread is. Let's see, for articulation, just started using, this is 40-pound mono. I'm not even going to use a bead. I'm just going to tie a loop in and probably come about a couple eye lengths back off the back, but start by tying it in on the top, the very top of the hook shank. Kind of do some loose wraps just to hold it. So basically just getting it aligned with the top of the shank there. Then I'll put some super glue down. Not a ton, but just a smooth coat there. And now I'll start covering up that glue. Just cover it up with thread. I start off kind of loose and then I get tighter. If you just start off real tight, it's just gonna push your mono over to one side or the other. We want it to stay right on the top. And so once you've got it wrapped down, then I'll just get progressively tighter. Go over a few times, make sure all that, kind of get all that glue pushed down. And then wrap all the way back to my point, which was at the barb of the hook, and then kind of go back to the middle there and leave it hanging. So that's tied in tight with a lot of wraps and some glue. 40-pound, I don't think it's ever going to pull out. I think the back hook wire would bend out before that mono would pull out. So anyway, got the top part pulled in. We're going to thread the mono through the eye of our back hook, and about like right like that is how much gap I want to leave. So just hold that. Again, I kind of have some loose wraps. This you want to tie directly on the bottom of the hook shank so that your loop goes from top to bottom and stays in line with the hook shank, so that your back one doesn't hang out sideways, it hangs out up and down like we want. So I've just got that kind of captured in. I'm going to go ahead and put some more glue down, and then I like to drop it, kind of target it on that bottom piece of mono. Just the point being, you want to try and get the glue all up in there, all around the mono, between the hook and the mono, kind of fill in every little gap. And then before I've got this tied all the way to the front, it's easier to cut if you have some room, so cut that there. And then I'll start just covering it. And again, the more thread wraps you have, then I start getting tighter and tighter. And the pressure is what helps the glue set too, so you just get some good pressure. And now that the mono is lined up and kind of held down, it's not going to get pushed around once you go tighter. So that is our articulation. So the front half of the fly, take a piece of the discarded marabou from our tail. I'm just going to cut some of the lower fuzzy ones from the stem here. And what we're doing is we're going to make a cover for that articulation segment, just so there's not a gap in our fly. So what I have cut there, I just kind of, this doesn't have to be neat, I just kind of push it all over the hook and then tie it down. And so my threads here is before the point, so I've got the stuff tied in, then I'm going to work with it a bit, kind of push it down a little bit so it's just covering that gap, making our fly look seamless. And then you don't have to tie that all the way back to the barb of the hook where we tied our articulation in. This I only tie back to just behind the point. So you can see now we have a covered up spot, so there's not just going to be a big hole in the fly. And then from here forward, we're going to do another complex twist, same as the one on the back hook. So start with our polar chenille. And you want this front part of the fly in general to be bigger and bushier, and just everything about it a little bigger than the back half. So when you're measuring out your schlappen, try and make the barbs that you are using a little bit longer than the ones you used on the back. It just helps the overall taper of the fly look better. You don't want a bigger, bushier back half and a scrawny little front part. So, alright, got those tied in. Trim that off. Bring my thread forward. Take the grips. Align the feathers. Pull those out. Find our polar chenille, grab it all up here, twist it up. Brush it out. Palmer it forward, pull in back as you palmer to not trap so much fiber. A little less shank to cover on this front part, so I'm making my wraps a little bit tighter than I did on the back one. And we have more stuff to add behind the eyes, so that is about good. wraps around this in all different directions. Trim this out without cutting too many feathers or your thread. Go ahead and brush this back. And pull all that back as much as possible. Wrap over it and then wrap back over it a decent amount. Like I said, we have legs and some more marabou to tie in up here even before we get to the head material. Brush this out. And the next step is going to be some palmering of some marabou. So you want a blood quill. This is a good blood quill for the yellow. The piece for the brown I have isn't as great, but it'll work. So similar to the schlappen, we're going to tie it in by the tips. Both colors, tie them in one at a time. This is our yellow. This is our brown. Again, this is this is a piece of woolly bugger marabou, so the stem gets thick pretty fast, but we only need a couple wraps, so it should work for this purpose. Tie this in by the tips. Now we're going to take both of those together, and it's going to look messy, but just go for it. Just a couple palmering wraps together, and then take your thread kind of over and through them. This is another thing that's going to look kind of messy, but we'll brush it out, wrap back over it, and it'll end up looking fine. So get a few wraps through all that mess, pull down tight, and try and find your stems as best you can. Just trim the stems without trimming too many extra feathers. And then you can pull all that back, wrap, 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 so that pushes all that mess back a little bit. You know it's not going anywhere now. And I've got some stems I'm going to trim out, feel them. So we take our Velcro, we can brush this out. That just adds a ton of volume, ton of movement. And that variegated color pattern, it's just a signature of this fly. Just a great look. So I wrap over all these butt ends here behind the eyes, try to make this smooth thread section there. So we got that. Now we'll do a couple rubber legs. I've got some barred silicone. I'm going to tie them at the midway point on the side closest to me. So a couple wraps. Then I'll take the other section, come over and around, and tie them in on the other side of the hook right behind the dumbbell eyes. And after you get a few wraps, just make sure they're positioned. You just want them coming off to the side. And we'll wrap over both sets. Alright, then if you want to take both sets of legs, I mean, if you could have done a better job of lining them up at first, but once you get them all tied in, you can trim them all at the top roughly the same length. So almost done. The last step which is what makes this Flugenzombie a Flugenzombie and not a circus peanut or a sex dungeon, is the head, which is made of laser dub. And the good thing about laser dub, comes in a lot of colors. You can blend colors, and we're tying it in at the top and the bottom, so you can do a two-tone color scheme. That's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to do the schlappen olive for the top and yellow for the bottom. That'll match the tail and the general overall color scheme we got going. So the trick to working with this, take a big clump out. It's all, I already straightened it a little bit, but it'll all be just a mess. But if you take a clump and pull it apart, stack it back together on itself, pull it apart, stack it back together, twist it in your fingers a little bit. What you're doing there is you're aligning all the fibers to be parallel and go in the same direction, because we're going to tie this in by the midpoint, so we want it all to be going the same general direction. So stack it a little bit like that, then I kind of grab it by the middle, pull from the ends, just pull any smaller, shorter fibers that don't want to cooperate, and then you take the midpoint and we're going to put it down on the top of the hook shank, and you're just going to make a couple not super tight wraps just to hold it in place. And if you want to spread it to make a wide piece on the top, go ahead and you can just work with it. Spread it this way, spread it that way. That way, because we're going to fold this back and tie it over, but you want to try and cover some of the middle part. If it's just on the top and the bottom, you leave a blank space on your hook shank that can kind of totally stop any fish from ever biting it. But no, it looks better when you cover it. So bottom, took some yellow, same process. Probably got it too much there, so I'll take some of that away. Stack it. Pull out any non-cooperatives. And then rotate this. Put the midpoint down. Tie it in. So now you can see I've got both the top and the bottom segment. The wraps are going over in the same exact spot. We're tying it in one little spot, and then I'll pull these to adjust them a little bit. Then good. Bring your thread, and then when you're bringing it back up this time, instead of wrapping through the midpoint, you first take your top part, separated, take your top part, pull it back, then wrap in front of that, and pull your bottom part back without stabbing your thumb on the hook too much, and then you start wrapping in front of those two bunches. If you wrap in front of them and then slowly work your thread back, you don't want to tie straight over the material, that adds a bunch of bulk, but tie in front. You're making a thread dam in the front of that clump that should hold most of it in. Some might pull out if you brush it super aggressively, but that's fine. Plenty will stay in when it's fishing. So we're going to repeat that process 2 more times. We're going to do one right in front of that clump but behind the eyes, and then we're going to move our thread in front of the eyes and put another clump in there. Same process. And with this one, you want this clump to be, you want your thread wraps to be as close to right behind those eyes as you can get them. Alright, so 2, 3 there, then I'll flip it. behind it, hold everything back. And go in front of the eyes. Alright, and then one more stack in front of the eyes. And with this stuff, I mean, the more you put, the cooler the head looks, and it makes this big bushy bulky head, but the slower it's going to sink. So depending on how you want it to fish, just keep that in mind. I mean, if you want a big bulky head and you're going to maybe be using a sinking line, and so you're not worried about the sink rate, yeah, pile it on. But if you are fishing it with a floating line and you want it to get down somewhat quickly, just try to be as light as possible with the laser dub. So do a piece in front, a few wraps. And I'll go ahead and put, I might do 2 more stacks, because like I said, I mentioned with the laser dub there's just all these colors, so like I might take a piece of red here to make a little throat mixed in with the yellow. And just kind of play with it, try and keep it on the top and the bottom on the bottom as good as you can. It'll move around a little bit, but and then once you get it wet and fish it, it's going to do it at once. But alright, nice. See I'm pushing that back, like a little dam there. And could leave it there. I'll do one more stack just to put some yellow in front of that throat. You can also trim the laser dub after you tie it in, but this head isn't getting too out of control, so I'll probably just brush it back and leave it full length. Alright, this one I wrapped over a little bit of that, so build up a little black nose here. But we're pretty much to the end. I'm just going to whip finish a couple times, and then I'll start brushing out. Again, some of the hair, some of the ice dub, laser dub rather, is going to come out when you brush. Don't freak out. It's fine. Still plenty left. So whip finish. Trim that. Take our Velcro. Brush everything back. the bottom. You can do your best to keep everything on either side of the hook point there. And there we have it. A nice Flugenzombie in a, I guess you could call it a brown trout color. Yeah, it's a nice fly. They catch plenty of spotted bass for me. I've never had a chance to go anywhere and fish for some big trout with one, but it's created for that up in Arkansas, White River area. But it'll work anywhere on anything that'll eat a bait fish. So try one out. Thanks for watching.